My presentation tonight relates to the area to do with the fire safety defects in apartments. I was appointed by Engineers Ireland to sit on the working group to examine the defects in housing. It looked at fire safety, water ingress, and structural issues. As I'll mention later on in the presentation, the biggest aspect that came out of that related to fire safety deficiencies that were found in various apartments. And then also, I was appointed to represent Engineers Ireland on the committee that ended up writing the code of practice for the remediation of fire safety defects, which form part of this remediation scheme. First couple of things, just a quick disclaimer, and I suppose the main thing from my point of view is that all of the photographs that I'm going to show tonight have been taken by myself in the course of my own professional activities. They are anonymized. I don't intend to identify what the buildings are, but just more refer to the issues that are raised in the photographs. And then obviously, as well as in most aspects of fire safety, there will be always differences of professional opinions on various aspects of things, particularly if and when we come to the Q&A session. Just to be aware of that. Just quick overview is that the state has launched it's launched one remediation scheme. There's really going to be 3 remediation schemes, but currently there's one that's active. There's going to be a full remediation scheme for the totality of defects in apartment buildings. Currently, they've launched the interim remediation scheme, which is basically about keeping apartment buildings which have defects, keeping them open on an interim or on a temporary basis. The full remediation scheme is going to require full legislation because it's going to affect building control. It's going to affect full compliance at the end of the day, with the intention that at the end of a full remediation scheme, an apartment block with defects will be fully remediated and certified as fully remediated. So the interim remediation scheme began in the middle of December of last year. It deals the remediation scheme itself, if you want to, in terms of, call it the overall remediation scheme, was set out by the Oireachtas originally for flats built between 1991 and 2013. It's really intended for flats that would have been subject to the building control system, but the terms of reference included 1991, which slightly predated the introduction of the building control legislation in 1992. But it affects both design and construction. Primarily, it's defects that arise under a failure to comply with Part B in terms of both and/or design and construction. We ended up producing this code of practice for the remediation of fire safety defects, which can be downloaded from the Department of Housing's website. It was issued in July 2023. It arose, the code of practice, as a result of one of the conclusions that were made by the working group, which is set up by the minister back in 2021, I think, 2020. The working group went on for about 18 months. And I'll come back and I'll just introduce that. One of the things that also came out of it was the importance of the carrying out of fire safety assessments. That it set up a process, the remediation scheme has set up a process for remediation. So what needs to be remediated? Mentioned design shortcomings, construction defects, and it applies to every type of flat. So from the point of view of the building control definition of a flat, will include everything from a bedsitter, a flat, an apartment, a duplex, condos, however expensive or however cheap they might be. So the actual remediation scheme is to allow rectification works to be carried out, and those rectification works will be measured and then will be paid for by the public purse. Now, it's set up under the auspices by Minister Darragh O'Brien. The Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage leads it. They have made use of the offices of the Housing Agency to act as the agent behind the carrying out of the remediation scheme. There's a number of phased actions required to achieve the conclusion of the scheme. It involves the owner's management company on behalf of the owners of apartments in a block. There will be a need for a fire safety technical audit report, an assessment report that has to be carried out by a competent professional technical person. The premises must be registered with the housing agency. The extent of the defects have to be quantified by the audit team. There then has to be a remediation action plan set out by the competent professional person. There must be liaison with the fire authority, the local authority fire service, as the code of practice refers to it. And again, that would be done by the competent professional technical person. Then there must be a remediation team, including a competent builder. That has, at the end of the works having been inspected and confirmed as being compliant, there then needs to be certification of those remediated works. And then the state is paying for those remediation works. There's really three schemes. There is the interim remediation scheme, which is now active, and that arises from 2023. It's intended to deal with emergency fire safety issues, and it's the owner's management company. It's not a private individual applies for funding under the scheme. It is the owner's management company representing all of the owners of the various apartments within a block. There is intended to be a main remediation scheme that will probably happen this year in 2024. That's intended to solve all of the fire safety defects with the intention of long-term solutions. That will be a scheme set up subject to meeting certain conditions, and that there will have to be an agreement, obviously, then again with the local authorities, fire service, in relation to those remediation works. And the big difference between the interim and the main remediation schemes is that for the interim one is that short-term measures can be taken to keep the premises open, and not everything is rectified or remediated. But under the main scheme, the intention is that the entire shopping list of defects will be addressed and completed and then certified at the end of that main scheme. There is mention of this legacy remediation scheme. There's no real details given on it yet, and that's really in relation to premises where works have already been carried out outside of the agreed dates for either the interim or the main scheme, and that there would be some opportunity for people to recoup the monies that they've already spent. But as I say, I haven't seen any details of it, and there's been no published data as to what might be involved in it, other than a more indirect reference to the fact that something will happen at some stage to do with this, what I've called the legacy remediation scheme. So in terms of the eligible premises, the eligibility arises from the fact of that there is multiple ownership, that there are a whole lot of common areas, and the eligibility of any applicant will be decided upon by the housing agency. The owner's management company leads the application. There's effectively a validation stage, and an application form will be signed out, application made, a grant agreement made between the housing agency and the owner's management company, and then a liaison person will be designated by the owner's management company to be the contact person on behalf of the owner's management company during that period. We'll come back to that anyway. I just want to give some context as well to where this came from. An awful lot of preparatory work was carried out. Initially, I suppose the first step was the setting up of this working group. And you can see there it was chaired by Seamus Neely, the former chief executive of Donegal County Council. Great guy. Had a really difficult task. There was a big team on board the working group. It was all done voluntarily. There was a very broad discussion a whole lot of different people were contacted, lots of presentations were made. There was an awful lot of meetings over an 18-month period. And eventually then, and it represented both Engineers Ireland were represented on it, RAII, the Chartered Institute of Surveyors, the Buildings Alliance, the Housing Agency, the department itself. And they did an awful lot of Herculean work really to come up and provide for everything. And just to give a taste of the how widespread the consultations were, here's the list of all the various different organizations that were contacted that made presentations to the working group. Information was gathered from them, everything from the owners network to the County and City Management Association, right through to the construction industry, the chief fire officers. And we even went as far as interviewing people from Victoria in Australia and New South Wales to get an idea of the same approach or difficulties that they particularly had themselves as well. And one of the interesting things that we discovered was that in the state of Victoria in Australia, that there had been a fire in a building in the city of Melbourne in 2014, in a lacrosse building, and it created within Australia an intense focus on the quality of their building work as well. And the government there set up a task force. It ended up bringing in a number of provisions. One of them was a remediation scheme for external cladding, and the agency that oversaw that was called Cladding Safety Victoria. They had a fund of $600 million for the buildings that they had. It caused a sweeping review of the regulation of construction in the state of Victoria, and also then a review of the building code of Australia itself. They also identified that there was, as a consequence, there was a major insurance challenge for professionals, and they weren't sure what the solutions to the problems that they were presented with were. But what they did recognize is that there would be a cost for construction. They actually introduced this building permit levy on all future constructions to pay for the actual rectification funding. But they also recognized that there would be an impact on industry itself, the risk that might be taken in construction industry, and then also on all the new kinds of construction and the solutions needed to solve things. But at the end of the 18 months, the working group published our report, and it entailed identifying that a process was needed, that there would be a process of discovering and identifying defects in apartment buildings, that there would be a scheme for remedial works to be identified, engagement with whoever the statutory bodies would be, and typically that's going to be your building control authority, your fire authority. There would be tendering and getting a cost for what those works would be. There would be an agreement for funding, and then there would be the process of carrying out the actual remedial works, and then ultimately certification of them, so that the buildings in question could be put back on an open market at some stage in the future with a clean bill of health from a constructional point of view. Some of the interesting things that we discovered was the extent of the problem. And while our remit was to look at fire safety, structural safety, and water ingress defects, it became very clear that the most prevalent defects related to fire safety. Now, among the totality of the number of buildings, anywhere between 50 and 80% of buildings are adversely affected. And that would, given the period of construction from 91 to 2013, that would mean anywhere between 62,500 and 100,000 apartments would be affected by that. 40 to 70% of properties are affected by fire safety defects. Not to play down the impact of water ingress or structural safety defects, but it became quite clear that the extent of water ingress was somewhere between 20 and 50%. And all of this estimation was based on feedback that was received from a very broad canvassing of owners, management companies, and replies that were given back to them. And I have to pay tribute to the civil servants who were on the working group for the work that they put into getting all of that information together and presenting it. One of the things that came out of it was that on average, the cost of defects per apartment could be anywhere up to 25,000 euros per apartment, and that ultimately the remediation cost could range anywhere between 1.5 billion and up to maybe 2.5 billion euros. It was also recognized that an awful lot of owners management companies and owners had already started rectifying defects that they had come across. And we reckon that maybe up to 12% of properties had already started, if not had completed, the remediation of certainly fire safety defects that they may have found in their properties. And that another 34% were already in that process of trying to rectify it. When it comes to anybody engaging with the remediation scheme, a number of documents will be important, published by the Department of Housing, the Fire Safety Guide for building owners and operators, especially then the Code of Practice for Fire Safety Assessment of Premises and Buildings, the Code of Practice for Remediation of Fire Safety Defects. Since then, there's been the publication of the frequently asked questions and an explanatory guide for that. And then most importantly is the applicants, the applicant pack for any applicants who go into the scheme. So just get a few things out of the way. One is that of just definitions. Flat covers everything. It's the building control definition of flat. The protected stairway, corridor, shaft, lobby will be all understood by means of the definitions from Technical Guidance Document B. Disputes can arise between people's interpretation as to fire stopping and the provision of cavity barriers. Fully understanding what a cavity and where this starts becoming important is one of the issues that we wrestled with was the whole area of common areas and what's understood to be common areas. And then another type of cavity is that of the plenum space, the space above the ceiling inside an apartment, that suspended ceiling space above an entrance hallway or above the flats itself. But ultimately, coming down to what is understood by common areas, and a definition was provided in the code of practice that resulted. It's important to understand when it comes to the remediation of apartment buildings that the persons involved in doing any assessment have really got to understand the fire safety strategies and the fire safety approaches taken to achieving compliance, not just in terms of compartmentation, but in terms of all the various fire safety measures that may be available to it, particularly when it comes to the interim scheme, because the interim scheme allows for temporary fire safety risk-based measures. So basic fire safety designs would include enclosing a room, the elements that go into enclosing a room, the importance of each flat entrance door protecting the common area, whether common lobbies or a simple lobby is provided, the whole thing of stairs and its enclosure, the exterior areas, what's understood by common areas, not just a common escape route, but the phrase common areas, the whole issue of smoke discharge, whether there's particular solutions which have been expected or are found in the premises for smoke shafts or some other kind of maybe mechanical measures, and then all the other issues that arise from linings, the combustibility of linings, fire stopping of gaps, floor constructions, the whole thing of services stacked from story to story, and the in-floor fire stopping versus protected shafts rising from the bottom of Mother Earth all the way up to the roof covering, and then the whole area to do with who owns what and the issues to do with external walls and the common cavities in external walls, whether it's insulated, covered by rain cladding, and then the whole area of fire stopping of these. The typical kind of defects that we would have come across were everything to do with fire doors, fire resisting ceilings, smoke alarm systems, problems to do with external walls and fire stopping of cavities, flat entrance doors not being fitted correctly or being modified over time, enclosures, fire-resistant enclosures not having been completed correctly, uh, everything to do with fire stopping and barriers and staircases, supporting walls, service penetrations, and then a number of different miscellaneous issues might arise to do with things like there is a fire alarm system, but the sound level doesn't achieve the required sound level to wake people up in a bedroom, and how do you solve that? Issues to do with spandrel walls and fire stopping and services being builders taking shortcuts, bringing services through a location that somebody may not architecturally expect to happen, but that made sense for the construction team when it was being built, and then the services not being adequately fire stopped for where those services are brought through. A whole load of issues to do with how you deal with external walls as per Technical Guides Document B, or maybe having to consider an alternative, but maybe not a TGDB supported an alternative, but an alternative that addresses the intention of the actual building regulations themselves. So a number of photographs I'm just going to show to highlight the typical kind of issues, problems that arise in relation to attic spaces that may be relied upon as a fire resistant cavity barrier and then not provided with the period of fire resistance. And when you come in, you walk through your attic space, you come to a party wall or to a separating wall, compartment wall, and you find that it's not fire stopped with the roof covering, and there's big gaps between one apartment and the next apartment, or between an apartment and a stairwell, like you can see there in the top right of the photograph with your stepped the head of the wall. Things like an external wall, when the external wall is opened up and you expect to see in behind in the top left of the photograph is your concrete floor slab and a stairwell concrete wall, but instead of seeing the fire stopping in that gap between the external leaf and the actual frame of the building, you can actually see into the flat in the bottom left. The timber where the arrow head is pointing is a timber framed element of the inside wall of a stairwell on the right hand side. There's no fire stopping between flat on the lower part, flat above it, nor against the stairwell. And then when you look into the photograph on the top right hand side, is looking at that vertical wall looking downwards, and you can see the fact that there's no fire stopping between the apartment to the left and the stairwell to the right in that top right of photograph. And then similarly in the bottom left photograph, the external wall opened up in the line of a compartment floor, and when it's opened up, there's no fire stopping in the line of the compartment floor between one flat and another flat. Again, carried out an inspection, and this is on the bottom left photograph is the point at which the concrete floor slab of an apartment goes out to a balcony, and at the top of that arrowhead is an actual gap which one can look down into the car park, the basement car parking underneath the flat. So if there's a basement car park, fire will spread straight up into the flat and fill the flat with smoke. Lack of fire stopping, and the gap isn't so big there, but as you rise up through the building, on the right hand side is a photograph of the actual similar gap on upper stories. So you can see there where on the right hand side where the arrow shows that the gap there was up to 6 inches or 150 millimeters across, and directly below that hand is my hand is the kitchen of a flat directly below. No sound insulation, no fire separation, obviously, and retrospectively, you've got to come up with an agreeable way of remediating that type of linear gap between one story and another story. Other issues arise in a duplex: protected stairway, the soffit of the duplex stairway not protected by a fire-resisting plasterboard or whatever the solution might be, but still used as a storage space or indeed as a utility room for plumbing and electrical services. Typical kind of thing arising in relation to doors, gaps around frames and the wall, and you can see at the head of the arrow that there's quite a large gap left when the architrave is taken off. And the architrave is not a fire stopping element. It's the actual physical gap has got to be filled all the way around. And then also doors that may have been fitted originally not as fire resisting doors. There's no provenance for the doors, and questions will arise over that. Again, more photographs taken of gaps on the left hand side. You can see where the gap will be quite considerable. And then remediation works that will have to follow through on every single door frame um, um, to end up with a fire resistant enclosure. This is a spandrel wall above a flat entrance door that when the plasterboard is taken off, you can see where services are brought through, and there's a big hole left, effectively an unfire stopped hole, or maybe as in the top right in photograph, that people are using it as a means of a builder or somebody else was using it as a means to ventilate the entrance or the hallway, the common corridor on the outside into the entrance hallway by and in and out. And then on the bottom right hand side is that the wall between a corridor and a flat, when you pop your head up into that plenum space above, you can see that there's a big long linear gap between what should be a fully fire resistant wall and the underside of the compartment floor overhead. External walls throw up all sorts of difficulties, whether they're compliant with diagram 17 and TGDB or not, and then your strategic approach to rectifying that, and how does that tie in with the inter-story fire stopping or cavity barriers to be provided. Riser shafts within buildings, that all looks fine from the outside. When you open the door and you look inside, is that the walls of the shaft in the second photograph is that there's no plasterboard covering. And then you get into issues of if it's a timber framed wall to the shaft wall, the height of the building maybe requires materials of limited combustibility. So all of that's got to come out and be replaced. Then also issues like when you put your head up to the top of the shaft of that story, you discover that there's a big gap then into the space above the common lobby that that there should be a compartment wall between it. And that's where the third photograph is trying to is the head of the arrow is pointing at that gap in what should be the compartment wall of the protected shaft, and instead is looking directly into the void space above the common landing, the stairwell or lift shaft landing, which shouldn't be the case, obviously, from a fire spread point of view. The issue of protected entrance hallways, that it's very easy to include fire resistant construction at the beginning, very difficult to go back and to remediate it, but it involves removing all your linings and everything to do it. Same kind of thing to do with confluences of pipes, fire stopping a spaghetti junction of pipes, pipes being installed but not being backfilled or being fitted with collars, services like pipes going through walls that then again are not made good, and they all have to be made good to reinstall your fire resisting walls. Then a couple of miscellaneous things like the bottom of a ventilation shaft to a car park that may have been accepted in the past under the 1997 TGDB, remaining silent about it, but in 2024 that would need to be fire stopped at the bottom if you're relying on your supply air to a smoke ventilation shaft. Silly things like ventilated lobbies, that the vent isn't at a high enough point to discharge smoke that might come out of the top right of photograph. And then things like, again, missing fire stopping from a car park basement can be a significant risk from anybody's assessment point of view. Smoke shafts where fire stopping on the left hand side, gap is left, and this is a photograph taken from within a smoke shaft, and the intention is that the smoke shaft is the pathway for discharging smoke out of the building. Yet smoke's going to go past by this fire door, and there's there's gaps around the edge of the fire door, allowing smoke to get into the actual corridors of the protected corridor serving flats. Silly little things like on your escape stairs, 1,000 millimeters or more. There's meant to be a second handrail. A lot of buildings are only installed with a single handrail. And then things like on the left-hand side there of where the windows of the apartments are too close to the glazing of the protected stairwell. And then also some miscellaneous things that don't show up in our guidance, not clear-cut guidance on it. Things like shelf angles that are exposed to a lower story fire, and how do we deal with that? And the remedial solutions, the competent person is going to have to come up with, sometimes with bespoke solutions that they feel adequately address the fire resistance of something like an exposed shelf angle, like in the right hand side photograph. So the process for it, just to summarize it, is that the applicant, the OMC, will enter the scheme. They'll appoint professional persons, a competent professional person, technical person, and a competent builder. There will need to be a fire safety assessment that's shown in the code of practice. They'll have to schedule all the defects. There'll have to be, remember, the first scheme is the interim scheme. So it is a interim measure to keep a building open. So there's going to have to be a fire safety risk assessment taken of that defect schedule, and then an agreed action plan. And I'll explain in a short while that there's 3 tiers of buildings identified overall. Very simple to address it, well, to categorize the tiers, but there'll probably be an awful lot of discussion as to what that means. There's a requirement that there's engagement with the fire authority. As I've mentioned, the interim and full remediation. There are notifications to be issued. There's then an inspection plan, the execution of remedial works, and then certification in a prescribed format. And then the building and the owner's management company with a certified remediated building exit the scheme. So there's 8 phases to any applicant wishing to get money, to get funding from the remediation scheme. So phase 1 will include the owner's management company submitting their application particulars, contact information to the housing agency. The housing agency will receive it, issue a confirmation of validity of the documentation they receive. They'll be given a case number, and then the housing agency will issue an applicant pack back to the applicant. The owner's management company is required to coordinate a whole load of different things. They instruct and engage a construction professional to do the audit. There will be a need for a written report, a fire safety risk assessment, which will identify the interim remediation works. That will have to be issued in a planned format. There will have to be engagement at that stage with the local authority fire services, who then will confirm that they have agreed. They may modify it, but they will confirm that they have been engaged with. The owner's management company will have to procure a competent builder. There will have to be a determination of costs for that schedule of defects. And then the owner's management company will submit to the housing agency, who will assess the eligibility and will provisionally approve funding for the interim works. Phase 5 will then result in the housing agency issuing what's called a grant agreement. And the owner's management company will have to sign off on that and subsequently return that to the housing agency. And then the housing agency can then confirm approval of funding. And that will allow the fire safety works to begin and for fees to be discharged. And a countersigned copy of that grant agreement will be returned to the OMC. And it's very important to remember, this is exchequer funding. So therefore, that's why there's so many checks and balances to make sure that everybody is agreed that they've agreed. And everybody will have a copy of this grant agreement, which will be a very important legal document between the OMC and the housing agency. The OMC will have their competent builder on site. They will carry out the remedial works. And then at the end of the remedial works, the OMC will issue the necessary certificates and the supporting documentation so that the the phase of the completion of the interim remedial works scheme will be arrived at. It's very important to familiarize oneself with the code of practice, particularly for the technical assessors, and most of our members who are interested in this will have become very, very familiar with this code of practice that I was involved in the writing of as part of the team of it. Diagram 1 is very important because it's the flow chart that explains the methodology of the code of practice itself, and how to begin with the first inspection to producing and identifying the schedule of defects, the categorization of the type of premises you have from tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 1 being a building that the defects can be rectified within the original fire safety certificate application. Tier 2 is a premises which will be substantially similar to the original fire safety certificate, but there may be a need to make minor modifications to it in agreement with the fire authority, but more or less keeping to the spirit of the originally granted design. And then tier 3 is a premises which will, because of the defects and the differing from the original fire safety certificate application, will require a new fire safety certificate, or indeed regularization certificate application, and may entail fire safety engineering solutions. The committee for the code of practice was chaired by the Department of Housing, Chris Barry, one of the fire advisors inside. But as I say, there's a number of elements to the code of practice that are important for people to familiarize themselves with, and that is diagram 1 and the 3 tiers. The bespoke technical solution, the code of practice doesn't tell you how to do it, what to do, but it does identify the fact that the defective building, or the building with defects, may be so different to the original fire safety certificate strategy that there really is a need for a complete new approach to it. The code of practice does give us a couple of different definitions that are important. The definition of common area. And one of those things is that it does include, common area does include the external wall. So it defines the common area as the area that's available for use by more than one person or owner, and all areas under the control of the owner's management company, including external walls, all the landings, lifts, shafts, staircases, and ducts and conduits, but including the external wall. And then it also gives us a definition for what's understood to be a fire safety defect. So something that's in contravention of Part B of the building regulations. Of assessment, Chapter 6 deals with fire safety assessment. Chapter 7 deals with fire safety risk assessment. It's a very step-by-step approach to following the code of practice, so that there's an important to understand the basis for the design of compliance, surveying the building, a need to involve opening up works, recording the fire safety assessment. Every item is a defect in its own right. There needs to be a risk rating provided to it, and then documenting it. Now, during the writing of the code of practice, we had reference to the document produced by Eamon O'Boyle and Associates in 2017, and we refer to that because it's very helpful in informing oneself to how to enhance fire safety in dwellings where there are fire safety defects, and it's referred to in the code of practice as well. There's a range of alternative features that might deal with interim measures, that's enhancing fire detection and alarm, management issues to do with things like everything from notification, frequency of drills, emergency lighting, fire safety checks on escape routes, on doors, on storage, the housekeeping issues, the closing down of certain hazards, either on a temporary or on a long-term basis during the period of the interim remediation scheme, the importance of flat entrance doors. It may not be possible to in the interim scheme to go into a flat and carry out works, but certainly that the common areas would be well protected. That's got to be decided by the remediation team. And then in extreme cases, the provision of fire wardens. The whole thing of confirming certification on systems, the installation of maybe temporary fire-resistant construction that would subsequently be removed, and then also liaison with improving facilities or making sure that the facilities for the fire brigade under B5 are addressed. A mixture of all of those are some of them. And the code does identify a whole load of interim measures. The separation, maybe sprinkler systems, smoke ventilation, addressing refuge areas, looking at your travel distances or maybe additional escape routes, enhancing firefighting equipment, and then also looking at fire engineering approaches, all allowed for under the code of practice. One of the things that arise from it is the remediation works plan, and that's got to provide sufficient detail to inform the local authority that the works that are going to be carried out are sufficient to allow a building to continue to be occupied on a temporary basis while the scheme is given effect, until such time as the full remediation scheme comes into play. And engagement with the local authority is dealt with under Chapter 13. The interim and full fire safety measures will have to be agreed as to what may be not included in the interim scheme. And that is going to be based on the risk assessment carried out. Now, it's important to realize is that the professional competent person is the one who's going to have to write up this plan. The fire authority they can give advice. It's not their plan. And I'm sure that there's going to be an awful lot of discussion between the assessing local authority fire officer when they receive the content of this interim measures plan. The Tier 3 approach will be different in the sense that because it's going to follow a different fire safety strategy to the submitted fire safety certificate for the building, that there will be a need for a new fire safety certificate application to be made. So the Tier 3 type premises are probably going to be remediated based on a full BCAR solution. A number of appendices are found in the code of practice, and there's pro forma notification in the code of practice. There's a notification letter that's got to be sent to the local authority, and then there's also a pro forma certification of remediation form in the code of practice as well. The important thing just to note about the remediation form is it's got to be signed by the builder, and it's got to be signed by the person, the competent professional person. And one of the things that's striking about it from my own point of view is that the professional indemnity insurance has got to cover the extent of the defects as well. And it's the intention of the certification is that at the end of the process, that the building is certified to be satisfactory to continue to be occupied under the interim scheme. Now, there may be premises that once the interim scheme is completed, is that the extent of deficiencies that remain are not so much that there's any question on the building going forward. But we'll see what will happen when the legislation comes in for the full scheme, and whether it's possible for people to certify full compliance of a building subsequently under the full scheme. But the intention is that it's an interim measure under Tier 1 and Tier 2 anyway. So there we go. And now we will hand over to questions, Sinead.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. That was a well presented piece of work there that you pulled together for us. Thank you very much. A few questions from myself to start off with, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The time span. I know you worked on the remedial works to Priory Hall. Your experience between going to site to investigate, document the issues to the end process where works were completed. What was that time span, and would that be envisaged time span for a lot of other works?
Priory Hall was kind of a special case in a way, because there was no previous model. From the point of view of initial inspections, I think it probably took about 2 years for things to mature to the point of where an understanding had been formed that the extent of the remediation required significant works. And Prairie Hall was really two buildings. There was 20 blocks in total, 5 6-story blocks, to give people a sense of the scale of it. There was a terrace of 9 buildings, there was a terrace of 11 buildings on the south, blocks on the south. Each of those had a basement car park. And I would say from beginning to end, it took about 5 years to do the 20 blocks, from the initial inspections of where the defects had to be identified, collated. The buildings were the big difference with Priory Hall, of course, was that it was decanted. Everybody had to move out, and everything was removed off the concrete platform. I think the intention of this remediation scheme is that the extent of non-compliance is rectifiable with allowing people to remain in place, certainly under the interim scheme. But I think people could expect that a building with the interim measures taken is at an acceptable level from a risk point of view, that it can be occupied, from the point of view of that there's early warning, a sufficient amount of fire separation, and adequate fire safety management to allow the building to continue to be occupied. But people could expect it could take up to 18 months. I wouldn't.
Yeah. So
I wouldn't.
With that in mind then, and with amendments to standards like emergency lighting, and with the highly expected IS 3218 and the amendments to the TGDB as well,
Yeah.
would consultants be wise to look at both regulations and to see to what standard the remediation work should be aimed towards, or does that depend on what tier your defects are going to fall into?
It does, yeah. I think fire. Let me throw my first little cat out of the bag. Is that I think fire officers are going to will have to agree that the standards for life safety systems will have to be at the age group or at the time of the design of the remediation works, if not before. So there's already an already existing building. Tier 1 and Tier 2 are really buildings that are going to adhere to the original fire safety certificate. That the expectation of the compliance of fire detection and of emergency lighting, the performance of those systems should be at least to what might one consider currently, without expecting that every fitting has to be replaced because it's not a 2024 fitting. I think that we'll never get to the end of remediating anything if you try to impose a 2024 version on everything. And I think there has to be a recognition. And for instance, with Priory Hall, or New Priory now, the Dublin City Council were really good in the way in which that they facilitated the completion of the works and the standards to it. The systems were all installed to the then current standard, so that because it's going to take a year or 18 months, you can't have a situation, pragmatically speaking, whereby at the beginning of the works, the design standard is 3218, 2013, Amendment 2019. Then at the end of the works, it's 3218, 2024. And somebody at the end of the works doesn't accept the certificate because you haven't installed the fire alarm system to 3218, 2024. Well, the works began in 2023. So, there has to be a degree of reasonableness. And by and large, fire officers around the country have shown their flexibility and their ability to see the bigger picture, the helicopter bigger picture on things as well. And it is remediation. It's there are defects being rectified. So every defect that gets rectified, it's a safer building. So I think there is that benefit at the end of it.
Yeah, one of the simple questions that's come in there is the requirement to engage with building insurers throughout the process.
Well, one should always begin with your building insurers to keep them, whoever is insuring the building, to keep them au fait with what's going on. Most building insurers, by my experience, are reasonable in the sense that they're insuring a loss. There are control measures to try to reduce the risk of that loss manifesting itself, and make sure that the building insurer is fully au fait, is fully aware of the nature of the building. Most insurers are very happy to know that a remediation scheme is in place. When is it going to be finished? Sticking to the milestones. And that's one very important thing in any remediation scheme, is to ensure that it does get completed, and it gets completed within the time scale. And if there's any threat to the time scale of executing the remediation works, that the building insurers are notified very, very early to let them reevaluate the policy that they've agreed with the OMC. But yeah.
Is there also any definition or limitation referring to the opening up of works?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind when that question comes up is what happens at the end of this process. The interim scheme is slightly different to the full remediation scheme, keeping in mind that the interim scheme is intended for measures that will allow a building with defects to continue to be occupied. In the interim scheme, not everything will be solved, not everything will be rectified. The full rectification is intended by the next scheme that's going to follow on, which is the full remediation scheme. At the end of the full remediation scheme, there's the intention that everything will have been rectified, and the person who is certifying that full rectification is effectively saying there is nothing left behind that's wrong in the building. So therefore, the extent of the opening up works carried out, to be able to write up this schedule of defects. Remember what the sequence of steps are, is that a building is identified as having defects. A competent professional is appointed to go to the building to review the extent of defects in design and in construction. They've got to write up a schedule of defects, which then carries through whether it's the interim scheme or the full remediation scheme. The intention of the professional person's review report is that it will be risk assessed as to how much needs to be done to satisfy the interim scheme, but it's still the basis for the rectification works for the full scheme. So therefore, the extent of your opening up works needs to be substantial. And like I've given a taste there of the extent of the defects that potentially could show up. So therefore, your opening up works needs to be able to inform on every single one of those types of issues, even if it's just say that doesn't exist in our building. That's great, but you actually have to do enough opening up works to confirm it. It's not light touch. The intention at the end of the remediation schemes is that your certification is full certification. It's not light work certification.
Okay, well, that leads nicely then. Is there a definition in the process there of what a competent person is, competent builder?
Yes.
And is there any recommendations or procedures in relation to appointing such persons?
Yeah, okay. Well, one of them is easy to answer. The other one is not so easy to answer. The competent person, the competent professional person, is identified in the Code of Practice as meeting the same definition that you get from the Building Control Act. So, uh, someone who's uh, on the register with Engineers Ireland, with the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, the Chartered Surveyors, or analogous competences, but it's somebody who's recognized under the Building Control Act, so that and that they've got experience, competence, insurance. In terms of the competent builder, that will be something that the owner's management company will have to satisfy themselves on. I don't think the Code of Practice sets out criteria other than, again, its skills, experience, and the wherewithal to be able to deliver the solutions and the construction works to rectify that schedule of defects. And don't and just keep in mind that, for instance, in terms of the assessments, is that Engineers Ireland is preparing this register of fire safety assessors and risk assessors as a pilot scheme, and that people who go on to that register of fire safety assessors would be deemed to be competent persons as a result of being on that scheme. And as that matures, and that you may know more about it than I do, but you know, that register could very likely be broadened out, and probably will be broadened out, to include the other analogous technical professionals as well, not just engineers, but everybody else to go on to that as well. And but that'll probably be on a statutory basis.
Yeah, just one final question, because I'm conscious of the time this evening. Just the end process and the certification, the retaining of such file, is that going to be done by the housing agency, or is that to be provided to the OMC for their records?
Well, the certification comes through the OMC from their professional competent person. So they have to submit, first off, there's the certification from a technical point of view of the building by the builder and by the professional inspecting person. That gets lodged with the housing agency. That effectively will then close out the scheme for the purposes of that particular building and that owner's management company for that premises. There is the potential for that certification to ultimately be lodged with the Building Control Authority and with the Fire Authority. And again, the legislation that's going to underscore the full remediation scheme may very well have provisions to create that register, or to allow for that certification to travel with the building control register for a premises, for an address, we'll call it, for a premises. The details of that in the full remediation scheme yet to be seen. But all I can say is that the certification at the end of the interim scheme is certainly intended to satisfy both the owner's management company's needs, the exchequer's needs, having spent a lot of public money on it, and then the owners of the buildings, of the apartments themselves, and the fire authority, of course, as well as the building control authority.
Yeah, perfect. We could talk and debate a lot of this
We could
for the evening, but unfortunately time has come upon us. Thanks very much, Michael, for presentations this evening.